Hello everyone. Good morning. So good to see you this morning. And it is my privilege to speak about the Last Supper, Jesus' Last Supper. One of the things that I love about funerals, sounds weird, but there's actually some really beautiful things that happen in funerals, and one of them is that I love hearing the tributes that people bring, or memories, or eulogy, whatever that is. And the things that are really important to them are often just the little things in life. So a grandchild might be talking about how grandma prepared for Christmas every year and how special that was, or when we went to grandma's house we had sugar on our cereal, or we had fish fingers and fat chips, like little things that actually have been really important to them. It might have been that they've been going to Ettalong for 30 years and staying in the same caravan park, for their Christmas holidays, or extended family gatherings and then with friends, and holidaying with the Smiths and the Joneses, or the Greys and the Papadis, like all different family contexts. But what's really interesting to me and heartwarming is how the little things in life, those little small rituals in life, are really important to us. And I'm from an Aussie culture, not a lot of cultural traditions, but many of you have those as well, right? You do things a certain way because you're Chilean or Samoan or Maori or Asian, like whatever. There's so many things, and I imagine as I'm saying this to you, I'm hoping you're thinking about your own family and some of the cultures and the traditions that you have, and the things that when your grandparents passed, the things that you miss and you think about them. The Jews had those as well in their culture. They had these very important traditions and rituals that they followed, particularly after the Lord had delivered them out of Egypt. And afterwards, we know, there was the plagues and the trials, and so God miraculously delivered them out. And afterwards, through Moses, in the book of Exodus and the book of Leviticus, the Lord said to the Israelites, I want you to continue celebrating the fact, this tradition, this miraculous thing that I did for you. And I want you to continue sharing that with the future generations, your children and their children, so that they don't forget what I did for you, and they don't forget how special you are to me. And so they did that. They began to do it, and they still do it today. 3,500 years later, the Jewish people are still celebrating what God did for them. It's so important to them. It's the oldest living tradition or ceremony. Over the years, it developed. So it wasn't just a story. It became known what the Jewish people do today as a Seder meal. So it ended up with, as you can see on the screen, a more formalised celebration. And these 4 cups of wine and the matzah, the unleavened bread behind, form kind of the guideposts of that celebration. And there's other things that are part of it. There's prayers and songs and storytelling that happens, but it's something that, as I said, the people continue to do to remember their tradition of remembering and to teach their children what God did for his people. I don't know whether you've ever watched it. Still, it's interesting to me. Has anyone seen Jewish Matchmaker? So good. And it's interesting because the people, even if they're not practicing Jews, they still, it's like in looking for a partner, he must celebrate, is it Shabbat, Chris and Mariana? Shabbat, they must celebrate that. It's so important to them. It's so much a part of what it means to be a Jewish family and to be together. So still very important to them. Over time, so there were 7 of these feasts, and over time 2 of them kind of combined. So we have the Feast of Unleavened Bread and the Passover feast, and together they form 8 days. And it begins with Passover. Passover, of course, represents, it's a reminder of the Passover, the lamb that was sacrificed, the blood that was sprinkled or painted on the doorposts of each Jewish home, so that when the final plague came through, the angel of death came through, the angel could see the blood and those families were spared. Sadly, not those who did not have the blood over, so the Egyptian families. And it was the last straw for Pharaoh, and he said, get out. He let them go. As they left, they had to go so quickly that their bread couldn't rise. So they end up with matzah, this unleavened bread, which really, that's what the unleavened bread was, to remember that God moved so fast in their circumstances that the bread couldn't rise. So then they celebrate that. That's kind of one of the celebrations. So both of these celebrations now are kind of combined, and you'll see, if you read in the Bible, sometimes it's called the Feast of Unleavened Bread, sometimes it's called the Feast of Passover, but it's actually the same thing, both of these celebrations together. All of that as a prelude to remember that Jesus was Jewish, right? And so were his disciples. They were all Jews. And so they had been celebrating, like all good Jews, they had been celebrating the Feast of Passover, the Feast of Unleavened Bread for their whole lives. Yeah. They had done it every year, they knew it, they understood all about it. Last week, Ken looked at Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, remember? And he had said to the disciples, I'm going to die. This is basically, I'm on my way, and within, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and I'll be handed over, I'll be tortured and I'll be crucified. So Jesus and his disciples were entering Jerusalem knowing that at the start of Passover. So they were coming in to celebrate Passover together. Up until this point, and you might remember back in the Bible, Jesus often said, don't tell anybody about the miracles because my hour has not yet come. It's not my time yet. And he said that over and over and over throughout, the Gospels. But he comes to this point and he's told the disciples that it is his time. My time has come. This is my hour. I'm coming into Jerusalem. I want you to think about, because we can just hear it, but imagine how that felt. I'm coming into Jerusalem. I'm going to celebrate the last Passover with you. I imagine they came into it purposefully, but with a heavy heart. I imagine that would have been such a heavy thought for all of them, right? The disciples knew and Jesus knew that within days he was going to be dead. He was going to have been killed. And so here it is, they come in to do this. Now, all of the gospel accounts give a version of this story. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, they all give a version of the story. I'm going to just sort of combine it and share the story as I think God's wanting to share it with us today. So they're coming in and it's time for Passover. Every good rabbi and his disciples would have to celebrate Passover together. So Luke tells us that Peter and John came to Jesus and said, Teacher, where should we prepare for Passover this year? And Jesus said to them, I want you to go and I want you to look out in the marketplace and you'll see a man carrying a pitcher of water on his head. Now you might think it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but it wasn't, because he's the only guy in the village with a bottle of water on his head, because that was woman's work, right? So here he is, the only guy in the marketplace. He's got a heavy thing of water on his head. And Jesus said, go and find him, which they did, just as Jesus had said. And they were to follow him. They said, we're going to follow you to your home, your master's home, which they did. And when they got there, they said to the master, and we don't know whether Jesus knew this man or whether it was a miracle, we're not sure, but we just know that they said to the man, our teacher needs to have Passover at your house. And there was a wonderful, just as they said, it happened, and the master showed them upstairs to a large room. It tells us a large room, fully furnished. It had everything they needed for Passover to happen. So they prepared the Passover. The 2 disciples prepared. And when the time had come, Jesus and the other disciples came. So there's 12 of them there. There's all the disciples and Jesus. Jesus' closest friends on earth were there with him. Jesus, at this time, would have, it would have been a traditional Passover meal, right? Maybe simplified somewhat, but it was a traditional meal. At the meal, as I said, there's 4 cups of wine. So Jesus would have taken the first cup of wine. Being the leader, being the rabbi, the most senior person there, he would have led the Seder. He led the meal. He was sitting there. They say that traditionally, the youngest person in the room would have sat on his right, and the most senior person other than him would have sat on his left. So that probably, as we've come to understand, would have been John on his right, the youngest disciple. I think this is really interesting to think about. John could have possibly been anywhere between 13 and 20 years of age. Like he was a kid, right? We put a lot of pressure on these guys. Here he is. Jesus was the oldest. On his other side, interestingly, probably would have been Judas, because he was the most senior of the disciples, being the treasurer. So he would have been there, and it makes sense because in some of the Gospels we read Jesus speaking to Judas and no one else hears. So maybe he was beside Jesus on this side. So everybody's seated, ready, everything's ready for the meal to start. And Jesus takes the first cup, which we have a slide of that one, and it's called the Cup of Sanctification. Traditionally, that starts with a prayer, a beautiful prayer, thanking God for his goodness, for his provision. We don't know, we're not told whether Jesus, I imagine he did, we're not told whether he said that prayer, but we are told that he took the opportunity to tell the disciples how important it was to him to be with them on his very last meal, let alone Passover meal. It says that with fervent desire, I have longed, which is so interesting considering what's ahead of him. But actually what Jesus is saying to them is that actually the translation is it says, with fervent desire I have desired. It's such a passionate term that Jesus is using. What he's saying is, I love you guys so much that I want to do this because I'm ready to take the next step, which is to redeem you. I'm ready to give my life as a sacrifice for many. So I'm imagining that myself and just thinking, wow, they've already got a heavy heart. I imagine that was, one of those, when you're in those moments with people and you're saying goodbye to them and there's just that emotion, that love and pain kind of all mixed together. I'm imagining that kind of started it and made them all feel so included and important in what Jesus was doing. He would have then taken the second cup. And the second cup is called the cup of deliverance. Traditionally, the leader of the Seder does not drink. They're practicing responsible drinking. They don't drink 4 glasses of wine in one meal. They take that cup and they dip the finger in the cup and then they put a drop on the plate in front of them for each of the plagues. We just remember the frogs. We remember the gnats. We remember the flies. We remember whatever it is, and they put a drop on the plate. And then they begin to retell the story of the Passover and what happened, right back from way back, the beginning of Abraham and right through to the new kingdom that we're not even at yet. They tell, and while they're doing that, they eat the meal. Back in Jesus' day, it was very simple. It was lamb, roasted lamb. It was some bitter herbs which help tell the story. This is probably this is probably a bit more of a modern meal, but I'm looking there and seeing there's a lamb shank, there's herbs, there's an egg, there's bread, there's all sorts of interesting bits that help tell the story, right? They're telling the story and people are eating it. It's a whole sensory experience. The lamb representing the lamb that was sacrificed, and the matzah representing the unleavened bread. Interesting, if you look at that, the bread has stripes on it. It's roasted with stripes, and it has perforations, it's been pierced. So kind of the significance of everything is so powerful in this story. It's a really beautiful story. While they were eating, they're sitting there eating this, already feeling, I imagine, quite emotional. Jesus drops a bombshell in the middle of it. He's sitting there and he says, guys, one of you is going to betray me. Can you imagine how that felt? You know, you're already, your heart's wrenching and you're looking around thinking, no, I would never betray you. And Matthew and Mark give the account that when Jesus said it, it says, they wrote, we felt very sad. We were very sad. That was the way they expressed how it felt when Jesus said that. Luke, remember, Luke is not actually a disciple. He wasn't there. He's very detailed in his account. He says, well, yes, they were sad, but actually there's a little bit more to it than that. What happened was that they were sad, and then they started wanting to defend themselves. So they start saying, well, it wouldn't be me, I wouldn't do it, but I think it's Ken. I think Ken did it. And Ken goes, no, I didn't do it, I'm better than you. Ken said he didn't do it. And then Ken says, I'm actually better than you. And Jay says, well, I'm better than Ken. So it degenerates into this argument. It wasn't George. We all know who it was in the end. But it degenerates into this thing that it should never, I guess, have been. But you can understand they're just beside themselves. They don't know what to do. John says, actually, you know what? He just takes a whole different take, the Gospel of John, the little guy on his right. He says Jesus produced did an object lesson for us to show us all about it. He got up, he took off his coat, he put a towel around him, and he got a bucket of water, and he began to wash our feet, which was something so humble, something so shocking to them, because he was the leader, and the leader did not wash the feet of the servants. The servants washed the feet of their masters. And then Jesus said, guys, come on, this is what I want you. I don't want you arguing about who's the greatest. It's not about who's the greatest in my kingdom, because my kingdom is actually that the greatest are the youngest, and the one who leads, the true leader, is the one who serves. This is the kingdom, guys. I'm only going to be here with you for another few hours. This is how it is. And so hopefully that kind of calmed them, but in the mix, in the process of that, it weeded out Judas, who obviously was the bad guy, and he exited stage left to do his thing. And Jesus would have known that. So I guess everyone knew that as they saw him leave. Then Jesus starts really going off script with the Seder meal. And it says he took some of the bread and he broke it for them. The bread that had represented God's swiftness in delivering them. He took that bread, he broke it, and he said, take and eat this. This is my body, broken for you. After 1,500 years of celebrating the bread to mean one thing, in 1 second Jesus changed it. Matzah is no longer a reminder that your God delivered you so quickly that your bread didn't have time to rise. Now, whenever you see this bread, I want you to remember that it symbolises my body, which is going to be broken for you. And to deliver everyone, not just Israelites, not just Jews, but everybody from their sinful lives. He then takes the third cup, the cup of redemption. And it says he took the cup and he gave thanks to God and he handed it around. He said, I want you to drink from it, all of you. This cup, it does represent ultimately God's redemption, but it represents my blood. And it is a new covenant. It's different. Right from now, things have changed. Things are different. It's poured out. My blood will be poured out for the forgiveness of many, not just a few. The Old Testament did its job to a certain degree, but it was only ever temporary. It could never fully deal with sin. Sin's always been a problem for us. The Old Testament could never fully deal with that because it relied on human obedience, which we know we're not so good at. It relied on animal sacrifices, and as pure and as spotless as those beautiful little lambs were, it was never enough for our sin. And they were written on tablets of stone, not in our hearts. Nobody changed. It was not enough to change us on the inside. Interestingly, right back, way before Jesus was born, in Jeremiah 31 to 33 are these really powerful verses. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and Judah. We've come here, sorry. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. Hundreds of years, probably thousands of years before Jesus was born, these words were penned. God knew what he was going to do, and right now, right at this time in this Passover meal, Jesus is saying it's being fulfilled. I will be the Passover lamb. The lamb that you eat and celebrate will represent me, ushering a new covenant written on your hearts. And this idea of blood, as much as it's quite disgusting to us, and I think the process was quite disgusting, having all those lambs slaughtered, I think the idea of it is that we need to understand the cost. And the Israelites did understand the cost. Those lambs that were sacrificed were lambs that they had taken into their family, and that they knew. It wasn't just some lamb that they picked out of a lot and was slaughtered on their behalf. They took their lamb and they had it sacrificed. They held it while it was sacrificed so they could understand the significance and the cost that was involved in the blood of that lamb. And Jesus is saying, I will be that for you. My blood will bring in a new covenant that will not make you clean on the outside, but it will make you clean on the inside. What a simple and powerful and profound moment that was for them all. There's a fourth cup that Jesus didn't pick up, he didn't drink, because he said, I'm not going to drink that, it's not time for that now. I'm going to go and be the sacrificial lamb, but there will come a time when we will drink that together. And that time hasn't come. One day Jesus said, we are all, at the end of the age, we will drink that cup of praise to God, and when we understand how amazing all the things that God has done for his people. What the Gospels tell us, that they gathered together and they sang a hymn together. And then they left. They went to the Garden of Gethsemane, which we're going to look at next week. What an amazing story it is, and I hope that understanding a bit of what a Seder meal means adds, I guess, if you don't know that, I know we have some Jewish people here today who understand that way better than me. But for us, that we understand that this is part of a bigger context, it's part of a bigger story than us just grabbing our communion, which we will do in a moment. We're part of something bigger. But before we do, as I was thinking about it, and I know Ken opened up last week the floor, and people had wonderful things that their story last week spoken to them about. And I'd love to do that, but we don't quite have the time today. But I guess the question I ask myself is, what do we learn about Jesus in the story? Well, apart from the fact that he's awesome, how cool is Jesus? I think because the thing that stood out to me is because of his focus on what he was doing on his mission. His humility and his strength knew no bounds. How incredible that he was going to the cross, and yet he called, it wasn't weak. There's no weakness in Jesus. He was humble. but he was standing. He was calling the shots right in that whole situation, that whole story. He told everybody what was going to happen. He led it. He led it so beautifully. And what stands out to me is the fact that Jesus had no bounds. He was humble, he was small, but he was standing. And I think if there's something that we can take away from this message for ourselves, I hope, definitely for me, and I hope for you, is that humility is standing small. We're called to be humble, but we're not called to be cowering in the corner. I think humility and a focus on what God has called us to do helps us to stand small. And another thing that really stood out to me about what Jesus is saying is that how we treat each other really matters in the kingdom. It's not about how much we know, it's not about how good we are. It's about how we treat each other. It's really important how we represent Jesus. And the thing I learned about the guys, the disciples, or the 11, not so much the 12, but the 11 in there is that, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of compassion for these guys. They were young. They had given up everything. They loved Jesus so much. And at the beginning of the meal, when Jesus welcomed them, he told them how much he loved them and he thanked them for being there for him. He knew the cost. He knew what they had done for him. And I wonder in that conversation that we shouldn't be too hard on them, because I imagine if I was in those shoes, I'd be doing the same. I think if it was me there, I would be scrambling to protect myself and to put Ken in the middle of it as being the guy who would betray Jesus. I hope not. But I'm sure, poor old Ken is in front of all the illustrations today. Ian definitely wouldn't do it. I wonder, there's a thing in counselling terms, and it's called, I don't know if anyone's heard it, it's called the window of tolerance. Has anyone heard about the window of tolerance? So it's this idea of the space in our lives emotionally where we can be calm and rational and be ourselves. So when we're in our window of tolerance, some of us may have larger windows, some may have smaller windows, depending on our life experience and how we were brought up and how safe we felt as a child, and whether we felt safe or whether we felt we weren't safe. I don't know. There's all different. Not everybody has the same window of tolerance. But whenever we're in that window of tolerance, we can act rationally and we can respond rationally. When we get triggered outside our window of tolerance, so we're triggered like Jesus says someone's going to betray me, and we panic, we can easily go out of that window of tolerance. And when we get out of that window of tolerance, we're irrational. We can't think clearly, we're not calm, we're petrified, we're angry, we go into that fight, flight or freeze mode, and we just can't help what we're doing. This week, some of you will know that we have a neighbour upstairs who can be challenging, and we live in an apartment. And I have tried over the 4 years that we've been there to be Jesus to her, to treat her as I think Jesus would want me to. And I try everything. She's very sensitive, and so like when I'm cooking, I have to make sure there's no exhaust fans on, and because she says she smells it, and the list goes on and on and on. This a couple of weeks ago, I was cooking something, and then she decided she was going to spray all the lifts, all the spaces with Glen 20, so that she couldn't smell my cooking. And so she did that, but the lady above her put a note in the lift saying, "Would the person who sprayed the Glen 20 stop doing it? You're giving me an asthma attack." So we didn't hear anything for a while, but I was cooking the other week, and I was thinking, I'm waiting for something. Anyway, so I cooked the meal, we sat down, we're eating the meal, and then the slamming started. Obviously, the smell had got to her floor. And I think she slammed every door, every cupboard door, every window in her house. It was just bang, bang, bang. It was about, I don't know, more than a dozen slamming. And we ate our meal and I was okay, but the next day I woke up and I thought, right, I've had it. That's it. No more nice life. That's it. I'm gonna write to the committee, strata committee. If I see her, I'm gonna give her a piece of my mind. And so I've gone from being tolerant to out of my window of tolerance. Out of my window of tolerance. And as I was preparing this meal, I thought, what would Jesus say about that? What would he say about that? What does a servant do? Obviously, I don't have to be a doormat. Maybe there's a conversation, but it should be respectful. But how do I best serve her? How do I represent Jesus as the ultimate humble servant on his way to the cross for me? How do I represent him in this situation with my neighbour? How can I widen my window of tolerance moving forward? And I thought this may be a key for us. Two things: standing small, if we can remember that, standing small in our situations, in our relationships, in your relationships. What are the things that are causing you to be triggered out of your window of tolerance? How can you stand like Jesus and stand small? How can we widen that window of tolerance? Well, I think the best thing for us to do is just keep looking at Jesus. What did he do? We need to remember the story. We need to remember that Jesus said in his kingdom it's not like that. We don't get to defend ourselves. We don't get to be great in his kingdom. We get to be humble, and that's great. We get to be low, and that's great. So as we finished, I thought maybe we could just find someone to simply partake of communion together with. Someone beside you, maybe in groups of 2 or 3, and just to spend that time. I don't know, if you're anything like me, you've got things in your life, and I need to grow, I need to learn what it is to stand small, and I need to learn what it is to widen my window of tolerance. Jesus' window was so wide, he could handle all of this and go to the cross, even though it was so incredibly painful and hard. He wants to do or continue to do a work in our lives so that we can widen our tolerance of pain and discomfort, and we can continue to grow in being humble, to be a servant, to be like him. Amen? Yeah. Amen. So why don't you just grab some communion, and we'll just take 5 to 10 minutes just to pray one for another. Maybe something in this story has stood out to you that I haven't mentioned. Maybe it's about your tolerance of pain. Maybe it's about wanting to be great. It's a natural thing to be great, and we need to learn how it is to be humble. Maybe it's your humility in situations. Why don't you share one with another, and just you can hop up, you can stand up, don't have to sit down, however you want to do it. That was so we'll just take some time to do that.